listening to the Discovery Pod, a podcast dedicated to conversations with leaders in the social profit sector. Discover the origin stories of CEOs, founders, and other senior leaders and learn from them so you can accomplish what is most important. Now, on with the show with your host, Douglas Nelson.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Discovery Pod, conversations with social profit leaders. Today on our show, our guest is Mark Breslauer. He's the CEO of the United Way of Greater Victoria, a good friend of the Discovery Group, and we're really pleased to have him on the podcast today. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Good morning to you.
Well, as an accomplished leader in the corporate sector, you made the leap to the social profit sector about 2 years ago when you took on the CEO role. Tell us what that transition has been like. What did you find initially when you came through the doors of the United Way?
Well, I think initial thinking was probably through the process of due diligence and joining. There are all kinds of generalities associated with for-profit, profit. Are you anticipating this? So part of this came to light during my research, during my experience, and that is, well, this perceived and real wild difference in the sectors. And my experience, what a big attractant for me was a long-time interest in this brand and support for United Way. Back to my big corporate days with a multinational based in Calgary, a big supporter of United Way, right through to different communities I've lived in. So a national, international brand for that matter. So I was aware of it, doing good work, an attractant for me as a long-time strategist, marketing, overall operation. I've really had the good fortune of being in areas was about this well-recognized brand, but not necessarily well understood. And so a transitional piece was, and an attractant, how do we really elevate this brand with really tight resources? So that was first and foremost the good work, understanding the community more. When I joined, I'd been living on the island for 4 years with a really interesting vantage point into medium and smaller businesses primarily. I was doing a fair bit of B2B. So the brand, digitization, long-winded answer to some degree to tell you there was some real commonality in things I've done and initiatives I've driven, and a big demand, a requirement for change that was very clear. And these are areas that have been rather constant through my career.
Mark, was there a moment in the early days in the job where you realized, well, this really is different than the corporate roles that you'd had in the past?
Well, one might think that scarcity of resources would be the most obvious. I think I've been in despite some big names with perceived deep pockets, fairly constrained and been very resourceful through my career. So that might be the most obvious, wasn't. The moments for me really came with the ability to change. Speaking for this organization, there was certainly desire there, but in terms of flexibility, nimbleness, and I apply that to really, we have many partners doing phenomenal work, many agencies. Certainly the ability to see it, to then leverage the change. And I think that was the biggest moment for me. Slower to come, slower to be able to affect that change within this organization was certainly one of the smallest in terms of both top line and team members. So change is always a challenge.
Right.
More so within this sector, I think.
When I talk to other leaders who've made the transition from the corporate world to the social profit sector, one of the things that often comes up is surprise at both the resistance to change and the underlying complexity of a lot of the organizations. And you mentioned the number of partners that your organization works with, needing to build that consensus and building those partnerships. How did you find that in your new role?
Well, mixed. I think that the experience certainly was one of openness. It's a tough fundraising environment out there, clearly. Your listenership would be well aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
So in a very tough market, I think that embracing that concept that we need to be different should have been somewhat universal. The results are the results. And I think that was probably the most interesting or varied response for me, that many with all the partners, and not because they hadn't necessarily experienced it before, weren't necessarily open to the concept. A little bit of this is what we do. And I'd be remiss if I said, that applied here, because it may have certainly applied in private enterprise, but seemed to be other mechanisms, whether it was driving principal ownership or someone that could affect that change or awareness, because it really starts there, the acceptance, the awareness to the change. And that was slower to come. And it really varied, but a great many that kind of head down, this is the good work we do, and very good work it is, right across the sector.
Right. And not only is the donor community changing its view of, and donors are changing how they're giving to organizations, both pre-COVID and during, but the United Way is going through significant change right across the country. And you've done a lot to lead that change in your organization. How have you balanced that changing donor community with the changing United Way to bring that into a cohesive whole and to tell a united story?
Well, we're very much keeping in touch with some of the best practitioners across the United Way network. So we're very fortunate in that regard. That said, our raison d'etre is really local. It is about local community. So it is the ability to understand initiatives that are really impactful, making a difference in communities that can be applied locally in the greater Victoria area. So on the one hand, it's keeping apprised of general research, whether it's might be a discovery group podcast, but it could be any of a number of potential sources out there. But the United Way network is pretty strong. There is a really solid community of information sharing and best practices. Donors are a fantastic source. It's really interesting. I think, to me anyway, I'm not by any stretch a professional fundraiser. I could say
you're getting there.
Well, I could say I was a professional revenue generator over the course of my career. And it really is a similar experience. The donor, the customer, to me, they can be intermingled. And really, donors have been very key in helping direct rather than, okay, it's that time, come support the cause, co-creation, which is very real, something that just, what are your areas of interest? What are your ideas? How do we potentially apply your business experience and success into something that can work here in this community to make a difference?
Right. And have the answers you're hearing from donors and your community partners changed over the last number of months as we've been going through this COVID pandemic?
I would say so, Doug. Clearly over the course of time, and again, not having been in this field for a great length of time, but watching in business, there are big challenges out there, from resonating with a changing demographic, lifestyles, but a more youthful band, we call it in age or in spirit, is certainly one of the areas that is changing and to stay in touch with. Another is, with that, digitization from a business efficiency standpoint, but just from the customer donor experience standpoint. And these are really topical. Resources, how to finance. We don't necessarily need to be the absolute leading edge by any stretch. I mean, we are a mid-sized to smaller United Way with X amount of resources. So it's how to bring the appeal with X amount of resources. So the specific question on donors, in some cases, they haven't fully articulated what they're looking for. They'll know it when they see it. And big opportunity has been to make the offering, the appeal, as tangible as possible. So rather than a generic, we support community, it's we specifically would love you to be a part of creating something on this specific initiative that will help this many seniors or this many children in this kind of capacity.
Right. Well, and that change that we're seeing, donors wanting to be more tactical or have their giving be more tangible by making a direct difference in the community, really plays well to the work of your organization, being as connected as you are to organizations and to the work that's happening. How has your organization been able to make that pivot to support the direct on the ground work for meeting needs that have emerged as a result of this pandemic?
So through the pandemic, initial onset, end of March, this really forced some prioritization that arguably could have been there. That opportunity before was compounded, and it became very clear in a few areas. So if I could cite the example of isolation and isolated seniors in particular, This became a focus. So traditionally, this has been an area of great involvement and assistance by the United Way Greater Victoria and United Ways in general, for that matter. But we began to zero in on a specific program that ultimately evolved into what we call More Than Meals, which provided X amount of nutritious meals, along with the opportunity to engage companionship at a social distance, and some basic things right up front, what we might call the entry point. And that was just identifying and tabulating where these seniors are as a start point. Many of them were indeed isolated and somewhat invisible in statistics and in actual outreach. So as we went through this process of tangible, how to build a program, once identified and working through agencies, our partners who are really on the ground. I mean, we're an organization that, well, in some cases, we don't provide direct services. We're so closely in collaboration with our agency partners, we're privy to and can help shape outcomes, really impactful outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And what you fund makes a direct difference in the community when you're working with and through those partners as well.
Absolutely. And really, perhaps bringing in some of my experience, it is always about what is our value add and where can we monetize this for our role. And that has really been apparent through our work here.
Right. One of the big differences in the change from the corporate sector to the social profit sector, I would imagine, is working with a volunteer board of directors who are very mission committed, care a lot about the organization. And in the case of the United Way, often the board members are people that have been with the organization and around United Way for many, many years. How have you found that working relationship with the board to be as a new first-time CEO in the sector?
Well, highly committed has certainly been a great pleasure. We have a pretty diverse board in terms of background. Again, our geographic mandate is the Greater Victoria region, a number of municipalities into Gulf Islands as well. And we've been at it for 80 plus years. So there's been an evolution of those who have been in and around the cause, community work for years and years, with really an interface and looking at different needs as we evolve. So my approach on the one hand has been similar to other boards or advisory committees I've reported to in other sectors. And that is a deal both as a collective, but also understanding the individuals behind those boards, behind each person on this board, and finding the key areas of interest, really understanding them, understanding the history, and really working together to, most importantly, understand the operating environment and where we're going. And so I think it's very similar in some respects, that it's continuity on this board, but it's certainly a change. And so I think, on the one hand, governance is governance.
Right. Mark, I'm curious, what was the biggest surprise about working for a social profit board in your first couple of years? Was there a story or a moment that you could share where you're like, oh, this really is different?
Yeah, I think that no one's actually said what was the biggest surprise moment. I think maybe the biggest surprise, as I reflect on that, is there hasn't been this massive disparity, so to speak. I think it might be that the issues, I've really tried to maintain the perspective that ultimately it is all about the donor and the customer. And I don't think that's cliche. And I really have trouble decoupling. Our mission and mandate is about opportunity and our community. But we need the funds, we need the support to deliver. And these fundamentals, that model that it starts with the customer, for me, has not changed. I would say that many with whom I deal, that might be not as readily as accepted. So the fact that the issues are the same, ultimately to deliver our product and service, which is community good, requires donor support, is mission critical. That donor support could be partnerships with the public sector, with private business, with labor. It could cross the spectrum, but that funding, that start point is the fuel that sets everything in motion. So to answer you, the biggest surprise is the issues are the same, but certainly as I get back to some of the changes and reflecting on an earlier question, I'm not sure that's readily accepted by a number of folks I work with. Again, it may be that in a lot of people's views, and I totally respect it, the community good in itself is enough. And of course, that's what we do. Without it, that's our value add, but we need the funding. We need the donor partnership support.
And it takes leaders across the sector realize and experience what you've just shared there is the need to be consistently focused on putting the donor at the center of things and connect that to the mission work and then execute against that connection. And that can be a challenge for some organizations. I often reflect when we get into deep work with some of our clients, we almost always at some point in the process have the realization, oh, this is resistance to change.
Yeah.
Who knew? Not everyone loves change. But it is so important to organizations as they're attempting to pivot through this pandemic, but many organizations were under pressure before that. I'm curious how you have approached coaching your team to see the pandemic and understand that you needed to do business differently. You're moving into your campaign period. Workplace is very significant fundraiser for you typically. And if workers aren't in the workplace, that's going to take some significant change. How have you worked with your leadership team to prepare for that?
Well, if I lead with expression I heard a little while back, and it seems to remain relevant, and that is, no one likes change but a wet baby. So that's change management for you. So accepting that premise, there's probably a few more inclined to change than others, but it was going to be different. The reality is that it is a challenging fundraising environment. And for us at the United Way Greater Victoria, one of the real opportunities was to better articulate our story. Here we have this reliable brand that's been around for years and years, but not necessarily the easiest to articulate, even internally. So specific to how to get leadership on board, a combination of, in the end, the numbers are stagnating. It is, and this is not a term that is readily used, I've experienced in the sector, a competitive landscape. There are X amount of dollars and X amount of hearts and minds to win over out there. So it has been a process to, first off, know the stakeholders, which is our team here, partner groups we work with, the board, and first understand perspective, and then work on starting with the reality of the operating environment. So that's the business case. We are seeing stagnating, challenged opportunities to make revenue. So how do we diversify? And it has taken time, especially coming from out of sector for a long time, and perhaps it exists today. Well, he's the one from the private sector may not get it. And believe me, I have a lot to learn. But I think reasonably quick study, it's coming in any kind of change management scenario and new to sector. And I've experienced that a few times. They're all different on the one hand because it has been different businesses. I've done things from manufacturing golf clubs to international supply chain on selling generators and right through to this. And it really is immersing, understanding, and listening a lot and building credibility. And with every human interaction, it's been one person at a time and ultimately then working as a collective. So it's listening. It is a balance between coming on in and running amok, so to speak, but at the same time, and coming in, brought in to help catalyze the group, make a difference. And so it is a lot of balance.
It sounds like you've been very thoughtful in your approach to making the transition and leading your organization through change. What advice would you give to someone who was in the private sector, who was thinking, I want to change gears, I want to change course and move into the social profit sector? What advice would you give them if they called and said, Mark, I'm thinking of doing this. I have this opportunity. How should I approach it?
Yeah, great question, Doug. I would certainly make sure that the mythology around this massive change, the lines have really been blurred. It's a little bit of business is business. At the end, it's a business. It is a business doing whatever in this sector, whether the ultimate aspiration is X rate of return or not-for-profit, maintaining that surplus deficit balance right in and around not-for-profit. The challenges, the issues, the cycles are really quite similar. But depending from where you come, what your experience has been, there may be some challenges, certainly with resources. There's certainly understand the history of the organization. And I think really change and change management, it's a little bit of a cliche piece is every human being's experience through this pandemic, it has been fundamental change. People can be resilient. But I think I would demystify that the sectors are so different. There are trade-offs to be made, just in terms of reporting here. Are you doing this kind of piece? I had the experience with I was doing some, if I could state it, because I think it gets right to your question. I was speaking to a group as I've had occasion to do at UVic Business School. And I was telling a bit of my background. The subject was about my experience crossing over, et cetera, to which one of the students boldly said, hey, from what I've learned, there's a big trade-off to be made in terms of money. I mean, you got to be making a fraction. So I think that was an interesting one. I couldn't really answer right then and there. So it was a little bit stymied, right. But I put it out there because, that's part of the trade-off piece that people consider as well. And there's real opportunity here to be fulfilled on that front as well.
Right. Mark, as we come to the end of our conversation, I'm really curious. You mentioned that immersing yourself in the sector. You said you still have a lot to learn. When you reflect on the 2 years you've been in the role, what is it that the area that you need to learn the most there is still to learn? Where are you going to turn your learning brain to over the course of the fall and into the next year?
It's constant learning about the community issues, the agencies involved in those areas, where we can partner. So it's understanding those, as certainly a number of these causes and needs have come more to the forefront during the COVID pandemic. So I've been on that learning curve throughout. That's really understanding who can affect certain areas in great need, whether it is across seniors, families in need, mental health and addictions. And so it's a constant learning curve for me. And there's new information, whether it be who are the purveyors of the services or what are the ways to deal. And so that's certainly been quite an education. I'm very fortunate to work with a skilled group in this area, but it's learning for all. But that is my biggest area of learning, right, for sure.
Right. Leaders across the sector are right in the pool with you, trying to figure out what this pandemic means for their organizations and how to keep the focus on mission as the needs of the community are changing so drastically and really so quickly. I said last question, but I'm going to squeeze in one more here. What is it that you're hoping as we move through this pandemic? What is the way the business has changed, the way your work has changed? What are you hoping to hold on to as we move through the pandemic and get back to the new normal following?
Well, we're very fortunate to have a great many individuals who support the United Way and many workplaces, and that's been over the course of time. And it is a fundamental shift to a virtual offering. Didn't spend a lot of time today talking about that being a huge pivot for us in really how we engage with donors and at workplaces that traditionally had physical events over years and years and years. So how to deliver the message is really the biggest. Educate, while at the same time pivoting and becoming more tangible, initiative driven. We pick specific areas to focus on. So our big opportunity is really in a short window, how to tell our story, and virtually for the most part, and in a compelling manner. And so it's fine tuning along the way. X moment in time, and that's been a great area of focus. We're living it real time right now. United Way campaigns traditionally have been most heightened in and around that Labor Day weekend through to the end of the calendar year. We've certainly worked to adjust to donor needs and really kind of what I'd call smooth the cycle. This is a year-round. The community needs are year-round in their nature. So it's dealing with a lot of moving parts. And very importantly, as we've changed, what United Way Greater Victoria is focused on and delivering. And that's a big piece. In addition to everyone else that supports us on an existing basis and perspective, so much change in their lives.
You're saying what I've heard so many leaders say, and my summary of it is that we used to say it's a marathon, not a sprint. But I think what you've just outlined there for your organization is It's a marathon that you run as fast as you possibly can.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I wish you and your team all the best through the fall and into the new year. And thank you very much for being a part of the Discovery Pod today.
Thanks, Doug, and the Discovery Group for your great leadership in the sector. Pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Discovery Pod. Be sure to tune in next week for another inspiring and informative conversation. Don't forget to visit our website, thediscoverygroup.ca, for more resources. If you like what you just listened to, please subscribe and tell a friend about it. Until next time, keep working to make your organization exceptional.